The concept of qualified immunity, it was established as a shield, a protective shield against liability for all government officials, clearly including law enforcement officers. But it's a shield for those folks who unknowingly violate someone's civil rights. It was created to reduce the number of unwarranted lawsuits faced by police officers. And first and foremost, and I can't make this crystal clear enough, it is not, despite the claims of those who want to eliminate it, a shield against all lawsuits involving excessive force, illegal searches, and other actions that officers get sued for. It does not protect bad cops. Qualified immunity only protects good police officers. That's why it's called qualified immunity. It is not an automatic defense. It has to be granted by a judge, and it's qualified. I mean, you have to follow the rules, the laws of your state. You have to follow the policies and procedures of your department, and so it's qualified. And I guess the best way, the situation that I can kind of compare it to is, an officer on the street. Oftentimes, we're faced with an individual who actually wants to commit suicide by the police. So if we use that as an example, an officer goes to a domestic or whatever, there's an individual there who's armed, threatens, family members or a spouse or significant other, comes out armed, basically. The officer has no choice but to fire on the individual, use deadly force, and he does that and uses deadly force. Now, the officers followed every procedure he could possibly follow. In this case, he would be granted qualified immunity when he's sued, because you're undoubtedly going to get sued, wrongful death lawsuit in a situation like that. But the officer himself would be granted qualified immunity as long as he followed all the law, followed all the proper procedures, use of force, the whole 9 yards. Then he would be granted qualified immunity, and it would be a shield against him being sued. This is very, very important because in civil lawsuits, oftentimes when there's a death, a civil jury will, although they find no wrongdoing by the officer, but oftentimes there's a potential where they'll go ahead and grant a judgment, a monetary judgment, where they go ahead and those judgments can be significant. And if an officer doesn't have qualified immunity to protect himself from that, I personally, as a retired police officer, if I was still working the street, there's no way I could take the chance to work the street and lose my retirement, my home, and everything that I have, because you're put in a situation where you don't have any choice to do something. And then if you faced a lawsuit and just one time, you lost just one time, and a judgment was awarded to a family or whatever through no fault of yours, you lose everything you have. And that's the reason why we have qualified immunity. Well, I can give you an absolute, fact-based example of this. There have been many attempts to abolish qualified immunity in a number of police reform bills all across the nation. Thankfully, most of these bills have failed. Unfortunately, that didn't happen last year in Colorado. The Centennial State is currently the only one of the 50 states that no longer allows law enforcement to seek qualified immunity in state lawsuits. Now, they can still qualify for immunity in federal civil rights cases, but maybe not for long, depending on what happens with the federal law. But what happened in Colorado, they almost immediately seen many officers who started looking at retirement. Now, there are those in Illinois, lawmakers in Illinois, who argue and say there hasn't been an increase in retirement, there hasn't been a loss of officers. But I know this for a fact, there has been. Those statements by our General Assembly members are disingenuous at best and actually untruthful at worst. I know for a fact, in talking to the president of Colorado, that they have lost numerous officers. And I'm not talking guys just retiring early. I'm talking guys with 10, 15 years on who haven't earned a retirement, who say, hey, we can't work under these conditions, so they're leaving. So not only do you lose officers with that respect, but then you start looking at bringing new officers in. I know that they're having a terrible time in Colorado getting enough officers who even want to become police officers. They're having a very hard time filling their training classes. And what this results in, I mean, they have to have bodies on the street. They have to have bodies fill the shifts. And oftentimes the standards for hiring are lowered. And, that's a concern we haven't even seen the effects of yet, but we will. We'll be seeing those effects in the next, 3 to 5 years where, you have officers that questionably whether or not they should be officers, but because they have to fill a uniform somewhere, they got to fill have to have people on the street. So that's an issue too. So look, it's not just the fact that we will be hiring people that in the past we probably wouldn't hire. It's also the loss of the experienced, qualified officers that we're facing now. You lose a guy with 10 and 15 years on, or a police officer with 10 or 15 years on. That's 10 or 15 years of experience. And these are good police officers. These aren't questionable. These are just guys saying, hey, I just can't take the risk. I can't take the risk to my family of losing everything. I can leave, go to another state, and still continue to be a law enforcement officer, or I can go to work doing something else. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And we saw it in the study that we did, where, an overwhelmingly large amount of officers, especially right here in Illinois, are looking to move on if they lose qualified immunity. Qualified immunity will actually be, in my opinion, the straw that breaks the camel's back. This police reform bill, 3653, is bad enough. It's now called the Safety Act. It's just passed into law. There was just a recent study done in DuPage County. They estimate the cost of this police reform in DuPage County, Illinois, at $63 million. That's just one county here in Illinois. And, you think about that for a minute, there's a lot of police agencies that no way they can take that kind of a hit. So, I know a lot of our General Assembly members, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, the governor here in Illinois have said, well, this isn't a defund the police bill. But actually, that's a consequence of this, that it is, in fact, a defund the police bill. Municipalities, sheriff's departments, all across the state just won't have the funds to maintain what they have now. I mean, I've heard of sheriff's departments claiming, hey, we're going to have to go ahead and let a couple of our deputies go just so we can afford to buy cameras for the rest of them. So on top of the qualified immunity issue, we have this defund issue, which is maybe an unintended consequence, but it actually is there. This whole thing is just a disaster in the making for Illinois. I mean, it does seem like we're getting attacked both on the state and national level. The FOP is doing everything it can to stop. I don't know if you know or not, but it's the George Floyd Act that you're talking about nationally. It did pass the House barely. I think the vote was like 112 to 120. So it barely passed the House with basically eight vote difference. And we're certainly hoping that we'll be able to stop it in the Senate. I know the national FOP legislative team is working diligently to try to prevent that from passing in the Senate. So hopefully we can end it there. But then what we're seeing across the nation in other states, for instance, Iowa, in their Senate, the state Senate just passed a bill that actually codifies qualified immunity for Iowa law enforcement and actually improves it, actually makes it a little bit better. So they defined it a little bit better and gives the officers there a little bit more protection, as long as they are doing, what they're supposed to be doing. And again, it only protects good police officers. Qualified immunity doesn't protect bad police officers, regardless of what anybody says. I mean, think about this for a minute. The unfounded liabilities with the Safety Act, those are going to result, unless there's changes made, there are going to result in taxes having to be increased here in Illinois. And I think that's something the citizens certainly were unaware of. They're offering them signing bonuses. if they'll leave their departments here in Illinois and go to work with, for the departments in Iowa. And it makes a lot of sense for them to do it. I mean, I don't know what the amounts are. I've heard as much as $10,000 signing bonus. That's nothing when you compared to the cost of training a new officer. Illinois has some of the finest trained, some of the most stringently trained and finest trained officers in the nation. I'm very, very proud of Illinois' law enforcement. I don't think people understand that since 2015, when we had historic police reform, that we haven't had any of these national incidents that we're seeing across the nation. Now, I don't know if that's just because of the police reform or the fact that our officers are so well trained, but the restraint that I saw from our officers all last year during the riots and the unrest that we seen with the pandemic. I'm very proud of Illinois law enforcement. We do have some of the finest trained officers in the nation. And frankly, we'll lose a lot of those officers to surrounding states if we continue down this path in Illinois of attacking our police. Representative Jim Durkin, he's the Republican Illinois leader in the House. He couldn't have said it any better than what he said recently. I think it was, he released an editorial in the Chicago Tribune on March 8th, and he said this bill is not about fairness. The Safety Act, this law, it's not a bill anymore, it's law since the governor signed it into law. The law is not about fairness. It's about the outright vilification of law enforcement in Illinois. And he went on to say that at one of the most lawless times in our state's history, punishing the men and women who wear the badge will not make our streets and communities safer. If you want to reform policing and the criminal justice system in an effective manner, we have to repeal this horrible law and start all over again. FOP has been accused of this also. He said, this is not fear mongering. This is reality. And it is reality. I mean, in their Illinois legislative black caucuses, and this bill is all about punishing the police. Unfortunately, what they've really done is punish the public. And it's the public that's going to pay for, in the loss of safety and in loss of public safety. They're the ones that are going to pay for this over time. And I think it's critical. It's absolutely critical that the citizens of Illinois remember that the law enforcement in Illinois was against this bill. We fought against it tooth and nail. We're not for it now. And I think we have to hold those folks accountable at the voting booth in 2022 who supported, and our governor certainly, who signed this law in this bill into law. We're your high school basketball coaches, your football coaches, the guys. We're out there. We're part of the community. We're not different from the community. We're an absolute part of it. And qualified immunity, I said it a little while ago, it's the straw that's going to break the camel's back here. We're going to do everything we can to try to make what's right, what we can do, what we can make right with this Safety Act. We're going to do everything we can to try to make some changes. And we're not doing it so much because of the concerns law enforcement has for law enforcement. We're doing it because we took an oath that even old retired guys like me still take very seriously. And that's to protect, serve and protect the citizens of this state. And so we're more about working against this bill because it is a serious concern of public safety with the citizens of this state. That's why that's our number one reason for being so opposed to it. And qualified immunity, the loss of qualified immunity specifically, is a part of that, because it's going to result in you losing some of the best law enforcement officers you have in this state. And the replacements that we're getting for people, there are some that are good. There are some that are, really needed. But as a whole, I question, the quality of recruits that we're going to be getting at this particular point, because frankly, who wants to be a police officer in Illinois during these times? Who wants to risk it all? We can't lose qualified immunity. It is the thing right now that the Illinois FOP is so focused on. We have to do everything we can to protect qualified immunity, to further protect our officers and to protect the civilians on the street.